Oregon Trail Director's Cut is a retro zombie survival game based on, to the point of parody, Oregon Trail, an educational game series that started in the 1970s and is still getting entries into the series to this day. This game is steeped in nostalgia and it came highly recommended by a friend. He knew that I loved indie games, zombies, and that I was an experienced gamer. Hey everybody, I'm McCoy and welcome to this 5-step review of Oregon Trail Director's Cut. Now, I'm always looking for the next great indie title, and if indie games are your thing, well, you're in the right place, so please consider subscribing, because while the AAA industry seems to be a continual car crash at the moment, I'm always looking for an amazing indie experience, whether it be something just released, or something like this that passed me by. In fact, I missed this by 11 years, 9 if you count the fact that I'm playing the Director's Cut, which dropped in 2012. Now, usually I blame the fact that it was only on PC and I only had consoles at the time, but this made its way to the consoles, and truth be told, I'm not sure how I missed this one. Now, please do drop this video a like, and much like my friend recommended this to me, if you have any indie games you think I should play and review, drop me a comment. But this review, as I said, is 5-step and it will go something like this. Step 1, we'll talk about what Oregon Trail is. Step 2 is talking about the mechanics and the game loop. Step 3 is talking about the story, before Step 4 is the graphics and the sound, and finally Step 5 is the conclusion. So, without any further ado, let's move on to Step 1. What is Oregon Trail? Set in the US, you try to get from one side of the country to the other through a zompocalypse. It's a blend of text-based, choose-your-own-adventure style mechanics and mini-action games. It has retro graphics and a surprising amount of depth. There's replayability in the form of unlocking new vehicles and seeing different endings. Originally, this game was released as a free-to-play Adobe Flash-based browser game and then as a Facebook app. It was then redeveloped later on by some of the original team, who then called themselves the Men Who Wear Many Hats, and Oregon Trail Director's Cut came out as an app in 2012, and then later on that year it hit Steam. As for the consoles, North America got it in 2015 when it arrived on the PS4 and Vita, and in 2016 it arrived in the UK, which is when my excuse for not playing it runs out. The game itself is based on Oregon Trail, an educational game series that first came out in the 1970s, the type of game that is given the portmanteau of edutainment, a combination of education and entertainment, and it is a word that I loathe for nothing other than the sound of it. Edutainment. Ugh. Now, after my friend recommended it, I was a little bit apprehensive at first due to my concerns that it may lean too heavily on nostalgia. Now, for me, nostalgia can be a little bit of a double-edged sword. It is genius if it's done right, but the idea of nostalgia is that something triggers a good feeling based on fond memories. In short, for nostalgia to truly work, in my opinion, you need to have those memories and a person needs to have experienced it. It's something that really bugs me about Fallout. Now, people say it's filled with 1950s nostalgia. While I appreciate and love the world that those games created and the backstory that they have, it's just not nostalgic for me. I'm not from the US and I wasn't around in the 1950s. For a gamer to feel nostalgic about Fallout, they would have to now be at least in their 70s. Now, I'm not saying that they don't exist, but are pensioners really the majority of the gaming population? Now, the fact that a lot of people said this was nostalgic due to its link with Oregon Trail is a little bit of a problem for me. Truth be told, I have zero memory of ever playing Oregon Trail. I might have done, but the memories have just gone, and I was a little worried that I wouldn't appreciate it as much, like missing out on the in-jokes and the references. However, I can say that after picking up and playing Oregon Trail Director's Cut, it is a great game in its own right and avoided any concerns that I had about nostalgia, which is not something that every remake, remaster or homage manages, and is great in spite of my lack of memories of Oregon Trail, and while I did have a couple of issues with it, overall, this game is a great experience. Now let's move on to Step 2 and talk about the gameplay. So the game is effectively split into two parts. There are cities which act as rest stops on your journey and the travelling in between. Set in the zompocalypse, you head out into the wastelands in a station wagon and you move from waypoint to waypoint. Your aim is to get to the left side of the map to a place called Safe Haven, which is, surprise surprise, a zombie-free area. And when you get there, you win. Simple, right? Well, not really. All the time you need to keep track of your resources, making sure not to run out of things like fuel, food and ammunition. In a way, it kind of has a similar game loop to FTL. High praise indeed, but you are constantly having to keep on top of your stocks, making sure that you don't run out. You need things like food to keep your survivors fed, med packs to heal them, fuel to run the car, spare parts like tyres and batteries to keep the car in check, and ammo to shoot those pesky zombies in the head. And on top of that, you need money to buy things to keep you going. Now, many of these mechanics could have been adopted from Oregon Trail, and I'm sure you'll let me know if they are in the comments below. Now, the game starts out easy enough with enough resources to not make you panic at first. food plentiful enough so you don't have to ration, ammo so you can be a bit liberal, and fuel enough to get to the next few waypoints. But that feeling of security doesn't last for long. Soon it becomes a balancing act, and it is this mechanic, that balancing act of resources, that the game thrives. Combined with the fact that your companions are endlessly needy. Keeping your companions alive can be tricky and eat up resources, but you need them at the end, so letting them die impacts you, and that's a part of Oregon Trail that really shines through. It made me feel like my choices mattered, a phrase I hate saying, as I often just find myself thinking that the only choice that really matters is if you buy the game. But in Oregon Trail, you seem to carve out your own stories. You choose your route, who lives and who dies, and whether you do something or avoid taking a risk, and I suppose, in a way, that is a little bit nostalgic for me, as it harks back to a time when I thought that games were simply limitless. So, on your map, you choose which destination you head to next. These markers often represent places like real-life cities or locations like castles or even Area 51. You plot what you hope will be the safest route and off you go. Now, for example, on the map there are areas with radiation which can kill you, but driving through them can offer different rewards or unlock new options for your next playthrough. So there's an element of risk-reward in most things that you do. Now, my favourite part of the game was undoubtedly the travelling between the waypoints. Every in-game hour, while travelling, something happens. Your companions get sick, or they tell a silly story, they may do stupid things that lose resources, or they may do good things that get you some, which at times made me question why they were actually with you, but while you can just kill them, you do need them later on. While you're driving along, you may stumble across a grave that you can choose to investigate or not, there might be resources there, or a zombie that you have to kill, and then you come across a horde. What do? Do you wait or do you go through? The things that happen are genuinely funny at times to the point of being ridiculous, and at other times it forces you to make brutal decisions like killing one of your companions. It really carves out a random and unique story every time you play. Now, the one bit of criticism I might levy at this is that some of the events or those comments repeat themselves a little bit too much, and at other times it can just be a bit too slow. For example, people are just perpetually getting ill. However, to break it up a bit, there are some more active events on the road. For example, you can meet a biker gang in which you have to weave from one side of the road to the other in order to block them. This, for example, often happens when you leave cities, and these events break up the text-based elements of the game. What gives the game for me so much impact is that you always feel like you're close to losing. Each move your car makes uses up fuel or potentially causes damage, and if you run out of fuel or spare parts, you may need to pull over and trade with survivors or go out scavenging. The thing you start to realise about Oregon Trail is there is a surprising amount of depth to it, far beyond its initial appearance. When you finally make it to these waypoints, these cities have other survivors that you can get tips from or speak with. Now, some of these comments also did seem to repeat themselves, which did kind of rip me out the experience, but it's not too bad. There are also shops in these cities where you can trade, each place having different prices, so you need to strategize, and hopefully you can buy the equipment that you need. And in some places, there are auto shops where you can pay to repair your car. If you don't have enough money, there's also a host of sort of mini games in these places, like going out and scavenging for items and money that you can trade with, or there's a fishing game that can get more food. And then sometimes there are jobs that you can take in order to get more money or things, often involving defending a barricade from a horde or taking out some bandits. And then if you do go scavenging, you have to think about when, as zombies are more active at night and it gets more dangerous. Now, these shooting games are some of the most challenging bits in the game, and it took me a while to get used to it. The aiming system felt a little bit tricky as you were pulling back on the mouse to aim, a kind of click and drag approach, and it made me wonder whether this system had been designed to trigger nostalgia when controls weren't as standardized, or whether it was actually a design choice. And to be honest, I didn't really enjoy it at first, but I did adapt. However, I do think there could have been a better way of doing this. What the cities did do was act as a welcome break to the chaos on the road, and on a game technical level, I think it meant by breaking up the sections of driving, it avoided it becoming too repetitive. I enjoyed the wonder of what we might stumble on in the next towns, whether or not they would have things I needed, or whether I'd have to risk it on the road again. I enjoyed the fact the scavenging became more dangerous at different times, the jobs that present the risk rewards because you could earn stuff, or fail and lose a little bit of life. The fact is, these places added respite and depth. So all in all, I enjoyed the gameplay loop, and despite a couple of repetitions and a little bit of issues with the controls when shooting, this game was fundamentally great to play. Now let's move on to step 3, the story. In the main campaign, you start out by choosing your main character and then 4 companions who head out into the zompocalypse with you. Now, in my first playthrough, when I streamed it on Twitch, I chose Fanny for the main character, which was actually a nod to a tune I played as on Project Zomboid while we had a laugh on Twitch. Now, my 4 companions were 4 friends from my Discord: Fish, Havoc, Wesley, and finally Jay, the person who recommended this game to me. I really enjoyed the personalization to this game as it helped me to invest in the story and characters. At the start of the game, you meet a character called Clements who gets bit, tells you about Safe Haven where you decide to head after DC gets nuked, and then he asks to be put down. And that is the crux of the story. When you get to the end, there's a kind of mini game and a boss fight, but to be honest, it's while on the road that this game shines through. This story becomes your own, and so much can happen to your group. They can get sick, they can get injured, and then if you're really unlucky, your character gets bit. Now, in my first playthrough, the first one bit was Jay. Do you keep him alive knowing that he'll turn using up food and med packs because you need him in the end, or do you put him down? Honestly, I chose to put him down, but like I said before with the aiming and the controls, I wasn't that great at aiming at that point, and I actually shot him in the nuts, which is actually something that made a fun and funny game funnier. But once he was gone, I really felt an absence. His story was over, and he was no longer present at the campfires in the cities, and as more of my companions fell, I actually missed the random stupid events that each of them created. I miss the silly stories they tell, and for me, that is the mark of a well-crafted experience if they can make you feel something. So overall, in terms of story, I really enjoyed the freedom and randomness of the story combined with the personalization which really helped me to invest. In terms of overarching story, it's just a zombie apocalypse story getting from one side of the map to the other, but it's the fact it feels like your story which really makes it shine. Now let's talk about step 4, the graphics and the sound. Graphics wise, it looks like something out of the 1980s. Now I know that graphics aren't everything. In fact, these days I feel that many AAA games are more concerned about style than substance, and many times I see it disproving that popular expression that indeed you can polish a turd. Now, I often think that games that use old school or retro graphics, something simple, needs to actually invest heavily in substance or they just disappear from the light of day, because if it doesn't look good and it doesn't play well, things like Steam just swallow it up, whereas some good looking games will still get attention. But in this case, did the developers choose these graphics to trigger nostalgia or because they thought it looked beautiful? Now, while I appreciated the graphics and I thought that the artwork for the cars and the camps looked great, I didn't really get nostalgic and I didn't overly fall in love with the animations during the combat section, for example. And I don't think that they're a selling point for someone who never experienced these kind of graphics. In fact, due to the graphics, I think that some people may never experience the awesome elements of the mechanics of this game. Now, I've heard some people complain about the look of Project Zomboid, but this is a level up. Now, the graphics for me didn't do anything to overly offend me, but as I said, I didn't fall in love with it. Sound-wise, I've got a very different story. For me, it was really atmospheric, and the soundtrack kind of gave me that John Carpenter Casio keyboard horror vibe. I genuinely enjoyed the music that was playing in the background, and while I could tell it was some retro sounds there, it's a little bit more polished than one of those kind of PCs with inbuilt speakers. So overall for me, the graphics were fine and they worked, but I didn't fall in love with them, but the sound was absolutely superb. So now let's move on to step 5, the conclusion. So my takeaway is that some games lean too heavily on nostalgia, hoping that enough people experience the feeling that they're trying to evoke, and that their memories are still accurate. Oregon Trail is most definitely the right blend. It clearly has some nostalgia attached to it, but I obviously missed a lot of it due to having no memory of Oregon Trail. The point is that I enjoyed Oregon Trail Director's Cut despite its nostalgia. What I truly loved, what shone through for me were the mechanics, that FTL feeling, the funny stories and text pieces, the randomness and the personalization elements. I love the stories that the game helped you to create, like a choose-your-own-adventure novel, and the difficult choices it presented you with. There was a slight repetitive nature to some of the encounters with strangers and to the text pieces, but the cities offset that a lot, and it did take me some time to get used to those shooting controls. But after not realising that this game existed for a very long time, now I've finally played it, I can say it's a game that I'll play much more. And if you're thinking of buying it, I'd say it's a good game, it's retro, it's nostalgic if you were there, but it is a great game in its own right. It offers replayability as the stories are random, there are multiple endings, and as I said before, you can unlock new cars to travel the apocalypse in. It's not the kind of game that you're going to play for 100 hours straight, but it is the kind of game that you're going to play for 2 to 3 hours in a session to complete a playthrough, and a week or so later, maybe a month down the line, you'll have another playthrough. So there you have it. And I suppose I better say at this point, well done Jay, you were right, as you were when you said that I'd enjoy Infinity Train and Paper Beast. And also, I'm really sorry for shooting you in the nuts. But these things kind of happen in the Zompocalypse. But from me today, all it leaves me to say is thank you very much for watching this video, and this is Roy McCoy, out!